right. I finally learned how to start manipulating images on PowerPoint. So I'm getting closer to the Hollywood quality trailer, or what do you call these things? You know, movie posters. But all right. Okay, good Friday morning, Backyard Naturalists. My name is Tim. I work at the Urban Ecology Center in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I'm absolutely delighted to be spending some time with you this morning as we approach peak spring splendor in Wisconsin. The warblers are starting to flutter in. The trees are waking from their winter slumber, waking as we learned from past Backyard Naturalist Caitlin Reinartz that trees do in fact need to sleep. At Washington Park, there's just a nice, beautiful carpet of dandelions showing up, another future topic, and it will warm up sometime soon, I promise you. And yes, we have had snow at the end of May in Wisconsin, but on the flip side, more often than not, we don't have May snowstorms. So buckle up for spring. Today's feature critter is the American beaver, which apart from humans is the premier natural landscape architect. So whether you're joining me live or recorded, I hope you're comfy and ready to reflect on the stories of the beaver in episode 32 of season 3 of the Backyard Naturalist, Beaver Pitch. But before we begin, down the Beaver Boulevard, I'd like to give a huge show of thanks and humble appreciation to Backyard Naturalist subscribers who keep the series accessible and sustainable every Friday morning, rain or shine. And I'd like to thank members of the Urban Ecology Center for your support of our mission to connect people in cities to nature and to each other. There are 2 exciting programs coming up in the members-only sustainability series starting tomorrow, where you can discover the bounty of the natural world as you explore Riverside Park with the often imitated but never duplicated educator Matt Flower, who will help folks learn to identify edible plants in the wild or in your backyard, and how to use them in your kitchen. Then if you stick around for next week, Wednesday, there's a Zoom program from UEC member Brett Heaton Juarez, and he'll talk about how investing is a process that can benefit all parties and promote sustainable stewardship for people and nature. So for details on either of those fantastic programs, check out your monthly member e-newsletter, or visit our website, or contact membership manager Glenna Holstein. And as Maggie mentioned, we are inching ever so closer to the reimagined Brew City Birding Festival, where we can all celebrate and learn about the birds that migrate to and through Milwaukee, as well as the hardy ones that are here year-round. There are many different activities, lectures, field trips, bird walks, a big day by bicycle, and I'm excited to highlight a virtual program by the master bander and wonderful human being that some of us know, Al Shirko. His program is called Bird Banding: Why Do We Ban Birds and What Do We Do with the Data? He will present a brief introduction to bird banding and the information we gather from birds. He'll describe how bird banding supplements what we know about birds from bird watching and why that information is important. For example, from bird walks, we know that thrushes and sparrows are in our parks. From bird banding, we gather data that shows these birds are using our parks as stopover locations to refuel themselves on their migration journey. So our banding data also supports a continent-wide collaborative project that studies breeding success and cross-year survivorship. Every time we touch a bird, we want to gather as much data as possible safely and quickly. Al will talk about other uses of our data, and he has been banding birds since 1996. He first banded birds in Riverside Park in 1998. So I'm really looking forward to that talk, as well as all the other parts of the festival. So check it out. If you're thinking of attending multiple events, or if you just like to further support the UEC's research team, please consider purchasing a frequent flyer pass, which gives you discounts on festival programming. So for more information on the festival, you can visit the Urban Ecology Center website. Okay, on to the featured animal, the American beaver. And for me, the strongest connections that we have with all of the backyard critters and the processes that we talk about, whether it's the moon or the rain or mycorrhizae, the personal connection, the personal stories that we each build up in our lifetimes as we explore the natural world. And I have a few fun, memorable beaver encounters, but I'll start with a canoe camping trip that I took with my wife, Jessie, along the Kickapoo River about 13 years ago. And if you've never canoed the Kickapoo, I strongly encourage you to give it a try someday. Totally worth it. And a few nights of camping, we found a perfect spot to set up camp on a sandy ridge along a bend where the river kind of widened. And we were a bit tuckered after a long day of paddling. And I remember going to bed, falling asleep pretty quickly and sleeping pretty soundly that night until somewhere between 2 and 3 in the morning when I found Jessie looking like she was auditioning for the Blair Witch Project. She was wide awake, eyes wide open, sitting straight up, flashlight on, had this look of terror on her face, staring outside the tent into the darkness. And when I asked what was up, she said she heard like 3 loud splashes in the river. The first one woke her up, and then the next few got her into this like terrified state, mind racing. So she thought something really large and scary was outside walking, splashing in the river, maybe towards us. And she in fact referred to it as the splash monster at the time. So as the loving and supporting empathetic partner, I wasn't worried. I told her, I don't think there's anything to worry about. And I fell back asleep. But the next morning we woke up and neither of us had been attacked by the splash monster. But when I went down to the canoe to start packing up, within a very short time, I saw a beaver swimming away from where our canoe was into the center of the river. So the splash monster was real. And my guess is that we had probably set up our camp and tied the canoe up very close to the beaver's den, which in this case was likely dug into that riverbank. And so while we have no idea what actually happened, I think that the splash monster was that beaver who was maybe a little upset that we had tied up our canoe near its home. And those midnight splashes was that beaver's way of expressing their displeasure at our choice of camping site, and was tail slapping probably at the canoe. And then when I went back to the canoes in the morning, I probably disturbed it again. And so Jessie and I lived to tell the harrowing adventure of our brush with the splash monster, aka the North American beaver, sometimes called the American beaver, sometimes called the Canadian beaver, with the Latin name Castor canadensis. And if we take a step back, the beaver is a rodent. In fact, it's North America's largest rodent. And I gotta tell you, every time I see a beaver, whether it's in the wild or on a screen, when it's swimming in the water and you just see that head, I mean, it looks pretty big, but it doesn't look that big. It looks like, you know, maybe an otter or even a muskrat or something like that. But when you see a beaver on land and you have some reference points, they look huge. And I'll show you some footage towards the end that really demonstrates this, but a healthy beaver can weigh 70 pounds. They're a little bit smaller now that we, you know, after centuries of trapping them, their overall weight has gone down. But 70 pounds for a wild animal like that, almost 3.5 feet long. And then if you add the foot long tail, that's 4.5 feet long. That's a big rodent. That's a big animal. And the largest American beaver on record was trapped in northern Wisconsin in the 1920s. And that was a 110-pound animal. So, you know, I think of that compared to my golden retriever, this, you know, the big beavers of today are almost as big as my golden retriever, and the big beavers from before are quite a bit bigger than Banjo. And not only are beavers really big, they're really strong. There's a lot of muscle packed into that frame, because think about it, they chop down and move and eat trees. So they have to be strong. And thankfully, they're not aggressive towards humans, although there is one documented human death from a Eurasian beaver in Belarus after a man attempted to catch a beaver because he wanted to take a picture with it. And the beaver ended up biting the man, and they have a very strong bite. Like, they can bite through trees. They've got sharp teeth, and it bit him in the thigh, and it severed his femoral artery, and it ended up killing him. So Beavers can be dangerous, particularly when humans exhibit poor choices. But for all practical purposes, beavers are not a threat to our well-being as long as we respect their space and don't do stupid things to them. For more on what makes a rodent, there's several past episodes on rodents, like the 50 Shades of Gray Squirrel episode. But as we move down the tree of life from the rodent order, we reach the family Castoridae, which is the beavers. And from here, it's pretty simple if you're a taxonomist, because there are only 2 species of beaver in this whole family alive today. There are 2 living species of beaver. There's the North American beaver on the left and the Eurasian beaver on the right. And that's it. That's all there is. So these are all the beavers in the world. But if you go back to the fossil record, there's a huge diversity of beavers, kind of pre-human. There were 35 different genera of beaver representing many, many more species. But for whatever reason, these were the 2 survivors to modern times. So we have one in the New World and one in the Old World, and they're both in the same genus, of course, the castor genus. So if we take a look at the basic beaver body plan, starting with those teeth, beaver teeth are extremely strong and extremely sharp and extremely orange. But they're not orange because of tooth decay. It's quite the opposite. They're actually very decay resistant. They're orange because those teeth are fortified with iron, and they derive that iron from the trees that they eat. So they have iron fortified teeth, and they need that because they eat trees. And if you've ever cut down a healthy live tree with a saw or with an axe, it's pretty impossible to imagine how hard it would be to literally chew a healthy tree in order to cut it down. Thankfully for the beaver, the process of chewing wood actually makes their teeth sharper. It's like a self-sharpening system. The top and bottom teeth kind of work together in the process of chewing, which is kind of the opposite of what I would expect. I think they'd get duller, but they're, as rodents, those teeth are constantly growing, so they need to be kept at a certain length, and they're constantly kept sharp through use, through chewing. And so this allows them to cut down trees of up to 3 feet in diameter. And if a beaver were to chip a tooth, that could be deadly, because beavers need those teeth to eat. And like if it chipped off part of its front tooth, which could happen, then there's nothing to keep those bottom teeth well, sharp, but also from growing uncontrollably. And so the teeth can just kind of grow to the point that they either jab themselves in the mouth, or and then they at some point they can't eat. So those teeth are super important to the beaver, and they rely on those healthy, strong, iron fortified orange teeth to live. And chopping trees is objectively a pretty dangerous assignment for humans and beavers. So this process doesn't go without risk. And while they and we are normally quite deft at chopping down trees, they can be injured or killed when things don't go right, as can we. And so beavers are one of the only mammals, along with porcupines, that can eat trees. And you talk about getting roughage in your diet. Trees are wood, rich in cellulose. And so both beavers and porcupines rely on a pretty hefty gut bacteria community to help them digest wood, and they're really good at it. They're really good at eating and digesting wood. And like rabbits, they and in a sense cows that rechew their cud, the first round of poop they'll eat again, and then the second round of poop that they can put it back through their system to get more nutrients out of the wood, similar to what rabbits do. And then their second round of poop is much drier. All the moisture is taken out of it, and a lot of that bacteria are staying in the gut. So moving from the teeth, we'll visit the most iconic beaver part, the tail. So beaver tails are instantly recognizable with that flat paddle shape that sets them apart from the much smaller woodchucks and the muskrats that have the long cylindrical tails that could be mistaken for beavers. But the easiest way to identify beaver is to get a good look at that tail. And when you get a really good look at that tail, I find it hard to distinguish this from the scales of one of our snakes or at the Urban Ecology Center, or a lizard. They have, this, and it's there. It is a mammal. There is some very sparse, coarse hair mixed in there. So it is a little bit of a strange, but it's strange to see this texture in a mammal, but this is the beaver tail, and it primarily uses the tail for swimming. So it's both a propeller and a rudder. And swimming is what a beaver does best. They spend most of their time in the water. They're most comfortable in the water. They're most agile in the water. The water is their happy, safe place. And they're pretty clumsy when they're out of the water. And they spend so much of their time in the water that in the 17th century, the Bishop of Quebec approached his superiors in the Catholic Church and asked them to declare the beaver a fish so that they could be eaten during Lent. So good for the Catholics. Unfortunately, when some Jewish folks tried the same strategy, it was determined that beavers were not kosher, so they weren't as successful in that movement. But so besides the fantastic use of that tail for swimming, to go back to the initial story, that tail is a warning call. It is used for communication. They will take that tail and slap the water, particularly when they take on their alter ego of the splash monster. On a recent eco-travel trip to Duluth, we had the pleasure of canoeing on a pond with the beaver lodge. And as dusk approached, the beaver came out. And if any of our boats got too close, we'd hear that tail splash, and then it would dive underneath the water. And so that splash can act as a warning to us or to something that might harm it, saying, hey, you're getting too close, you need to back off. It can also act as a communication to a family member, to a kid, a grandkid, saying, hey, there's something troublesome, going on out here, get back in the lodge where it's safe. So that tail slap is a good way of communication. On the land, the tail is still important, kind of acts like a kickstand, to help secure that ungainliness of a beaver out of the water, or as leverage when you're trying to chop down and move a big tree. So that tail is that recognizable, iconic, useful part, almost synonymous with the beaver itself.
Hey, Tim.
Yeah.
A quick question. By rounds of poop, do you mean that beavers eat their own poop?
Yes, they sure do. As far as I know, if my sources are correct. It's just, and that's something, again, particularly if you have an animal, a mammal that's eating plant material sometimes, and it's like only the plant material, they're either going to have a really long gut for digestion. So you'll see that in like manatees that are eating all that seagrass, have a really long digestive tract, or like with cows, they have the rechewing of the cud to get more nutrients, to kind of the physical breakdown and the separate components. Or in some mammals, they will actually just re-ingest it one last time, so the food takes 2 passes through their body, which is pretty ingenious or gross depending on how you look at it. But if we move back to that aquatic lifestyle of the beaver, in addition to that wonderful tail that provides propulsion and steering, beavers are superbly adapted to life in the water. The tail, the webbed feet that helps them swim 7 miles an hour, that's pretty fast. Their ears and nostrils can shut tight to keep water out, which is really hard for me to think about because we as humans have virtually no ear control, but a lot of animals do have a lot of control over their ears, whether it's your dog, moving the ears in certain directions. Birds have a lot of muscles around their ear opening. And in a beaver, they can shut their nostrils and shut their ears super tight. So if we, as being not super aquatic, if we jump in the water, unless we're holding our nose, we run the risk of water getting into our nostrils or into our ear, which, can be really unsettling, not just like uncomfortable, but unsettling in terms of balance. And, but beavers have very strong muscular control that just makes them watertight. And they have essentially their own pair of built-in goggles in the form of a nictitating membrane or the third eyelid that can shut. It's a clear protective film so that they can keep their eyes open while underwater and yet still protect their eyes with that clear membrane. And an even stranger adaptation is that they have a second set of lips. They have kind of a watertight set of lips and then this furry second layer of lips, so that if they're moving or manipulating wood underwater, that helps, helps them to move their mouth around without, having water rush into their airways in their mouth. So they can hold their breath for 15 minutes, which is absolutely incredible for an air breathing mammal. So beavers just perfectly designed for this aquatic lifestyle. And they can pretty much live anywhere there is water. And if there isn't water, like an upland forest, and if they decide that that's where they want to live, they will create their own wetland by damming up a stream. And the changes that they make to a landscape are beneficial to them, but they are beneficial to many, many, many other plants and animals. They're what we consider a keystone species, because when they alter a landscape, changing a forest to a wetland, they increase the biodiversity of that area by quite a bit. So the first step a beaver goes through in turning dry land into a wetland is to dam up a stream. And I can tell you from personal experience, I spent many hours as a kid camping, trying to dam up little creeks, and I never succeeded. It's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of hard work for a beaver too, which is why the saying busy as a beaver is quite appropriate. They essentially start with a base layer of mud and gravel, and they use their very strong legs and mouth and tail fighting that current, and it can be a really fast current, to start to build up this lattice work of sticks and mud. And they're moving pretty big logs against a current with their teeth. So think of their neck muscles, all of the muscles. That's crazy strong. And then finally they get this dam in place, which creates a wetland above the dam that gives the beaver more room to swim around in and provides protection to the area that they're most comfortable. Once the dam's built, the work isn't over. It's never over. That's why we don't say lazy as a beaver. They are daily inspections of that dam to repair leaks. And sometimes they'll alter the water flow on purpose. They'll release more water or shore up the dam to reduce water flow, just as humans do with our dams, to periodically adjust the flow. And I just like to say that human dams are a totally different story from beaver dams in terms of ecological importance. Human dams are mostly destructive, and beaver dams are mostly helpful both upstream and downstream. And it's not just that one beaver or two beavers that are working on this wetland. It's the whole family working together. You have parents, you have kits, not kids, they're called kits, and you have grandkits, sometimes generations working together as a beaver colony. So beavers are monogamous. They pair up and mate for life with the same partner. Mating occurs in the winter. They got about a 3-month gestation period. Their natural wild lifespan is about 10 to 15 years. And the absolute best, most fantastical thing about beavers is that they do have kits. A litter will consist of 1 to 4 kits. And this is where we'll take, I don't know, 30 seconds to marvel at the unbelievable cuteness of beaver kits. And I wish I had a soundtrack, but you'll have to use the acoustics of whatever is around you now as your soundtrack as we marvel at beaver kits. So kits develop pretty quickly. They can swim the day after they're born. They're weaned at 2 weeks, but usually that fast development means they're then going to be go off to their own. But they stay with mom and dad for 2 to 3 years in either a lodge or a den. Beavers are very social animals. If the family lives along a river, like the ones at Riverside Park, and the river is just too powerful to dam up even for a beaver, instead of building a lodge, with the fast flowing water, they will build a den into the riverbank, and it's usually at water level so they can get in and out pretty quickly. Like the photo on the upper right, or the upper left. And so this is the case for the Milwaukee River, the Menominee River in particular. We have plenty of beaver activity, but just not the right conditions for lodges and dams. But a lot of beavers that either create their own wetlands with a dam or live along a lake or a pond or a very slow moving river, they more often than not will build these lodges out of mud and sticks and grasses and moss. And the whole family is housed in there. So you can have, 10 or 12 animals living in one lodge. And everyone's working, everyone's helping. The family's working together. Like a family and a farm. They're working together to build and maintain the dams, the burrows, the lodges, to cut down food. So they stay with their parents for a couple of years, and that's likely where they learn the skills to be a successful beaver, to be able to design and build and maintain structures of their own someday, and to cut down trees. So a typical beaver lodge is about 8 feet wide and a few feet high. There's often a front door and a back door, and one at least or both of them will be an underwater entrance so that they can make a quick water escape from a land predator, because once they're in the water, there's probably nothing that can really get them. And then once the kits finally reach about 3 years old, they're sexually mature, and they go off to start their own beaver families. And sexually mature beavers produce something called castoreum, which is seen here in its dried form from their castor sacs in both males and females. So when a beaver goes to mark their territory, they combine the liquid castoreum from their castor sacs with urine to mark their scents. And the word castor, which is the genus of beaver, Castor canadensis, is not related to castor oil, which was my first thought. Castor oil comes from a plant. The beaver castor is related to the word castrated, because all of the male genitalia is internal, as one might expect from a mostly aquatic mammal like a seal or a whale. And so there's no external differences to be able to tell the difference between a male and a female. So to determine their sex, scientists have found an easier way, and I'm saying easy as a very relative term, because according to those in the know, the easiest way to determine the sex of a beaver without cutting it open is to smell its castoreum. And to smell the castoreum, you have to milk the castor sacs, and good luck with that, because I'm pretty sure that's an easy way to piss off a beaver. But then once you've collected the castor, apparently, according to author Ben Goldfarb, male castoreum smells like motor oil, and female castoreum smells like an aged cheese. So once you have your castoreum, there are many quote unquote uses for the substance for humans. It's an FDA approved food additive. And if that totally grosses you out, apparently, again, I have no firsthand experience of this, apparently castoreum actually tastes pleasant to the human taste bud. It has sort of a vanilla raspberry accent, and has been used still today in some old-timey ice cream brands. And if you don't believe me, we will take a quick listen to a conversation between David Letterman and Jamie Oliver.
There was one point you were talking to a bunch of kids, and you said that vanilla ice cream contains beaver.
A beaver anal gland, yes. Oh, come on, you telling me you don't like a little bit of beaver anal gland? Okay, if you've ever had...
You want sprinkles with that, son? No, you have any beaver anal gland?
No, listen, you may well...
You're making that up.
It's a product called castoreum. It comes from basically rendered beaver anal gland. It's in cheap sort of strawberry syrups and vanilla ice cream. And if you like that stuff, next time you put it in your mouth, just think of anal gland. Okay.
Well, try and stop me.
Can I just tell you?
But no, wait a minute. When did that become okay?
Look, what happens is in the food industry, while the cats are away, the mice will play. And that's the point of the show. The point of the show is to sort of tell the story of where food comes from.
But why beaver?
More to the point, who found out that the beaver anal gland tastes good? Do you know what I mean?
Hey, Larry, this tastes like ice cream. Come on over here.
Yeah.
Give it a lick, Larry.
It tastes so good.
Oh, my God.
So that's something you can think about next time you're having some Fred's. Actually, Fred's makes frozen custard, so you probably don't have to worry about that. But in addition to being a food additive, castoreum is used in perfumes, and even some very popular, apparently popular Chanel brands like Coeur de Russie. It is in some liquors. There's an Eau de Musk whiskey and the popular Swedish Beaver Tail schnapps. It has been used to flavor cigarettes. If you would like to purchase some castoreum for yourself, it costs you about $5 an ounce. The current annual industry is way down. It's very low. It's less than 300 pounds annually compared to vanillin, a much more familiar ice cream additive at 2.6 million pounds. So on that sweet note, we'll move on to the home stretch as we talk a little bit about the sometimes rocky relationship of beavers and humans. And I just cannot overstate how important beavers have been in shaping North America, Europe, the temperate Asian landscapes for millions of years, and probably other parts of the world from the beaver ancestors. So when you have 400 million beavers creating wetlands, that's a lot of wetland. That's a huge amount of real estate being turned into wetlands. And, wetlands benefit us in so many ways. So you have beavers making these wetlands for millions of years, and just about every plant and animal you can think of has likely benefited from this. And if you see a big expanse, along a river valley, there's two major forces that have created that expanse. One is glaciers, kind of at the sub level, but at the surface level, you have beavers that over periods of times they're just kind of smoothing over the surface and creating that landscape. So again, I can't overstate how important beavers have been in over the millennia. But I'll try to do just a very quick kind of overview of this. So from a wildlife perspective, again, so many birds, insects, fish benefit from beaver wetlands. Even the mighty majestic moose get a lot of their favorite food that wouldn't normally be growing in an area because of the wetlands created by beavers. When beavers flood an area, it is likely that they often do kill a lot of the trees, which we may think of as bad, but standing dead wood is one of the most important ecological contributors to the base food chain of insects. So when a tree dies, that wood is quickly colonized by insects. There's a large invertebrate community, and that's the foundation of a healthy animal community, because so many animals receive their nourishment directly or indirectly from these insects as you move up the food chain, from woodpeckers to hawks, or from squirrels to bears. Additionally, beaver wetlands clean the water. They filter out sediments. They provide millions of dollars of ecosystem services. And even in today, when we think of like the really harmful effects of farm runoff and agricultural runoff, beavers do a really good job of fixing that nitrogen so it doesn't cause these algae blooms. They're released either into the air or into the vegetation. And then when the vegetation dies, it kind of is, we talked about those sources and sinks in a previous episode. So it's just incredible the amount of, again, ecosystem services, cleaning water. And then even if a dam breaks, like here, and that water kind of rushes out, because a beaver is only going to maintain a dam as long as it's alive and useful and in the area. So if a beaver dies, maybe it maintained that dam for 10 years or so, or 15 years, and now it's done. And so the dam will break. Sometimes beavers will generationally work on the same dams. So you have like whole neighborhoods of beavers relying on one. And in that case, they're all communally building that dam together. In fact, I think the largest beaver dam today is up in maybe Quebec. It actually started in the 1970s and is still being actively maintained by the local beavers today. But eventually these dams break. And then that it releases all of these nourishing sediments, minerals into the soil. And so really important, it's comparable to and likely way more impactful than the flooding of the Nile, at least in terms of area. So releasing nutrients, cleaning water, enriching the soil. By slowing down the flow of creeks, these wetlands recharge groundwater aquifers, which is really important. They prevent flooding, they reduce erosion, and they act as natural fire breaks. And how important is that in the modern age of intense wildfires? But unfortunately, the beaver human story takes an ugly turn right about where you'd expect it to when us modern humans, particularly those with European ancestry, start to realize two things. First, we can profit off beavers, and second, beavers' activity might prevent us from profiting in other ways in this good capitalist society. So to the first point, beaver populations in both North America and Eurasia at some point become decimated from overtrapping. And when you look at the story of European conquest of North America and the Milwaukee, beaver furs and pelts take center stage, fueling wars. And to the second point, as large-scale landscapers ourselves, beavers will often change the land in ways that we don't want them to. So if you own a tree plantation and you're looking forward to getting some lumber, a beaver-created wetland will likely kill off the trees because they can't survive the flooding, and then you will not see the profit you need as a business owner. Good for the woodpeckers, bad for the owner of the stand. So, or if you're a farmer and you have a field that's flooded, the crops become flooded because of a beaver dam, it's not good for your pocketbook. So beavers do directly cause likely tens of millions of dollars of economic damage, and that is a real conflict. And also, beaver dams can directly lead to infrastructure instability. Roads and bridges are not often engineered and built with beavers in mind. So if you have a culvert that's going under a road to keep that road dry, a beaver looks at that culvert and says, oh, that's a perfect place for a dam because most of the work has already been done for me. Call me lazy, but you just saved me a ton of work. And if the beavers dam the culvert, then the road becomes exposed to standing water, which weakens it and begins to wash it out. So this is also a real conflict between beavers and humans. And of course, then the usual response is to trap and kill the beaver. And you already have people killing beavers for the useful parts, which is why beavers worldwide were practically wiped off the face of the earth. Here in North America, around the year 1400, there were an estimated 400 million beavers. And then after just a couple centuries, that number went down to less than 1 million. It was even worse in Europe and Asia. But eventually, public awareness, conservation efforts led to a very successful rebound in both parts of the world. In places like Germany, they had to be reintroduced because they'd been completely extirpated. And then beaver conservation efforts, which we started to learn about decades ago, led to some pretty, we realized that, decimating this landscape is really bad for the environment. It leads to drought. It leads to other things locally. There's no groundwater recharge. So we started to realize, hey, that maybe wasn't such a good idea to take all the beavers off the landscape. So we start trying to put them back into the landscape. And then you get some pretty wild and fun stories of humans, even decades ago, thinking outside the box. So we will watch one of those efforts now.
Large shipping crate. Into the holding crate they go. Whoops. Get back in there, old girl. That's better. A good load. A load of beaver for the mountains. In preparing for the operation, beaver must be sorted for even size and weight, with one pair of beaver for each box. Ear tags are attached for future information. Into the drop box, nearly ready for that flight back into the mountains. drop crates are loaded into the airplane. Parachutes are attached to cargo lines, and the boxes are stacked in rows along the waist of the plane. 10 boxes to a load, 20 beaver ready for the flight to mountain meadows. The plane makes a careful approach, ready for the drop. Now into the air and down they swing, down to the ground near a stream or a lake. The box opens and a most unusual and novel trip ends for Mr. Beaver. He's on his way now. His nose and his instinct tell him where to find the water. There's room here for a new home.
So there's, I mean, this might seem like maybe an attention getting, like engineers just kind of like thinking, let's just, parachute beavers in for fun. But actually the area that they were going to in Idaho, there's just no roads. And so they tried putting beavers on donkeys, but the beavers and donkeys, there was like too much conflict going on there. And then just from a purely cost-effective method, this was the cheapest way to get beavers back into these remote valleys that needed them again after they were wiped out. So there's some really fun stories. I'll share some of the links. There's actually quite a bit of information on this project. And I'll share some of these links with you in the weekly email. But this particular project involved 76 beavers that were parachuted to these valleys, but they had to do a lot of testing. And there was one particular individual that they named Geronimo that was the so-called guinea pig for this testing. And so they kept dropping Geronimo over and over again from the planes to test the best case, crate, and he survived. And at some point he had been released and caught and put back so many times that eventually after he was really, the crate opened, he would just go right back into the box because he knew he'd be captured again for the next trip. So, but happily Geronimo survived all the test drops. He was one of the 76 beavers that were dropped, and 75 of the 76 successfully made the leap and basically began a new lineage of native landscapers in this valley. So as we wrap up, I can't think of a better place to illustrate the story of successful beaver conservation efforts than our hometown of Milwaukee. So when I started at the Urban Ecology Center in 2002, 20 years ago, and the research department started to really pay attention to the land, beavers were not even on our radar. The Milwaukee and eventually the Menominee rivers. In about 2005, a colleague confirmed a beaver sighting near the North Avenue Dam, and we got pretty excited. It was the first, sighting of a beaver in a long time. They'd probably been gone for 100 years or more, and we had thought that hey, beavers are returning to the good land of Milwaukee. But after that initial sighting got us really excited. We didn't see one again for the next 2 years. And then we saw one again 3 years later in about 2008. So, we saw 2 beavers in a period of 3 years, and we had seen none before then. But then I think another year passed, and then in around 2010, we started to see maybe a few more sightings, but more importantly, we started to notice the activity, the beaver chews. And so that first started along the Milwaukee River and the Menominee River. And if you hike along these rivers today, you can't help but see this. And the eagerness that some of these beavers, I mean, they're tackling some really big trees. Sometimes they give up, I think, because they realize that their teeth were too big for their stomach or something. But it was really exciting to witness this return of the beavers to the urban rivers in Milwaukee and other cities around the country. At Riverside Park, we soon found where they were denning, and we started to get questions from the public, like, what are you going to do now? Like, what are you going to do with all these beavers? They're cutting down trees. How are you going to handle that? So it's just an interesting perspective to think about, because we were just really excited to have them back, while others in the community just saw like the damage that they were going to do. And so Our amazing land stewardship team saw this as a good sign, and even though this might mean they'd have to, sacrifice a few of their prized trees, instead they spent the time improving or adapting their land management plan. And this was their return as a result of their good work improving the land. And so we welcome the beavers back, and now we're working on they kind of adjusted their management plan to one that can coexist with beavers, and where they're going to plant certain trees and everything. So we're glad that the beavers are part of our community today. But I'll also send you a link that documents, there's a documentary that looks at the return of the beavers to Milwaukee. And in our website, we've got several blogs and photos with our trail cameras that pick up some great activity at night, because they're mostly active at night. But I will kind of finish things up with a very quick snippet from a documentary that looks at the beavers specifically in the return to Milwaukee. And it's pretty long. It's like 11 minutes long. So I'm only going to play a short bit of it, but I'll send the link. And it's not releasing beavers by parachute. It's a little more traditional. But I picked a segment of this not only because it shows them releasing beavers, but also it's just a really good example of.
This was the first tree. This is like the first kiss. Right there. That was 3 years ago.
Hang on 1 second. Oops, I can't get. Maybe 12 or 13 years ago, we had somebody spot a beaver in the
base, so that means
so
it's not easy for predators or even people to get close.
Here we go. Okay.
Karen McKenzie, and I'm a wildlife rehabilitator at Fellow Mortals Wildlife Hospital in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. There's a lot of beaver trapping goes on in some of the counties that we serve, and so it's very difficult to find a release spot for beavers. So today we released a beaver, Chip, who had been at the hospital for 3 years, since she was just a few months old, and we got to release her back to the wild.
Welcome to the 4th of July Freedom.
This is just north of the Urban Ecology Center, up by the Quaker House.
She's kind of on a sort of tributary to the Milwaukee River, and there's an island space, so that means it's not easy for predators or even people to get close to her. There's very thick vegetation, but her temporary lodge, which is basically just a wooden box that sits on the bank, has a long plastic tube that goes down into the river, which gives a sort of temporary safe spot for her.
Everyone was very quiet, and it felt like kind of a special moment. The beaver was a little timid in leaving the control box into the river, but then we were able to watch it for actually quite a time, and it seemed pretty special to me. It was like we were communing with this thing as it reacquainted itself with its natural world. And there were half a dozen or so of us watching this, and everyone was just quiet and observing, and hopefully there'll be more of those kinds of experiences for everybody.
The last time
Oops. So the beaver human story continues today. My colleague Owen Boyle shared some kind of interesting and sobering facts about current beaver management. In Wisconsin alone, the USDA destroys over 1,600 beaver dams every year. And then they also trap and kill the colonies associated with those dams because they don't want them to rebuild them if they're in conflict areas. And while oftentimes these are they are the result of actual damage, like we talked about, to roads or to crops. Sometimes, unfortunately, the destruction happens because people are concerned that the beavers are destroying prime fishing streams, which sets up this false narrative of beavers versus trout. And a lot of the current recent research really supports that beavers are actually benefiting the sport fishing industry, but there's this idea that they don't. And so we need more demonstrations of that. We need more research, and that's currently happening. But it's likely that the sport fishermen are actually hurting their hobby by having these beaver dams destroyed. So I'm so glad to be sharing our backyard waters with this fascinating creature. I hopefully we will continue to realize their benefits to the world, particularly in the fight against pollution and agricultural runoff and climate change especially. And now, if you want to look for a beaver, you don't have to go far, at least to see the beauty of their work along the urban areas of our cities. So thank you for joining me today. I look forward to seeing you next time, and I will stop sharing my screen.